He thought he was adopting a dog. What he didn't know was that the dog was about to save his life in ways he couldn't have imagined. The wind howled through the empty streets of the small town, carrying with it the scent of rain and pine. Tom, a former U.S. Marine, walked through the doors of the shelter, his boots heavy with the weight of the years he had spent on the front lines. His eyes scanned the room, filled with cages of dogs waiting for a second chance. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but he knew he needed something. The loneliness he had been feeling since returning home seemed to grow every day, and no amount of time spent at the gym or in therapy could seem to fill the void. The door behind him swung open, and a shelter worker stepped forward, a dog in tow. She was a German shepherd, her coat a mix of sable and black, her amber eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored his own. "This one's been here for a while," the worker said, her voice soft. "She's a bit shy, but she's good with people. Would you like to meet her?" Tom nodded, though he wasn't sure why. He had never been much of a dog person, but the idea of bringing some company into his empty apartment seemed appealing. He knelt down to her level, his hand outstretched. The dog took a few steps forward, her nose twitching, her gaze locking onto his. For a moment, it was as if time stopped. He saw something in her eyes, a recognition, a connection. Without thinking, he spoke softly. "Hey there, girl. You're not alone anymore." The dog took another step closer, her tail giving a small, hesitant wag. Tom felt his heart flutter. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. But little did he know, this was not just a rescue for the dog. It was a rescue for him, too. As he left the shelter, the dog beside him, he felt a flicker of hope he hadn't felt in years. Her presence was soothing, grounding. But it wasn't long before he realized that something was off. She was more than just a companion. There were moments when she would stare at him with an intensity he couldn't quite understand. One night, as he lay awake in bed, the dog suddenly jumped up, her ears perked, her body stiff. Tom sat up, alarmed. The silence of the night was broken by a faint noise outside, distant but unmistakable. It sounded like someone was in trouble. Without hesitation, the dog bolted to the door, scratching at it urgently. Tom's heart raced as he grabbed his jacket, following her outside. In the cold night air, he could barely make out a figure in the distance, stumbling toward them. A man, injured, barely able to walk. The dog, with no hesitation, ran to him, nuzzling his side, guiding him toward the porch. Tom rushed to help, his training kicking in. The man was hurt, but it wasn't the injuries that caught Tom's attention. It was the dog's instinct. She had known long before Tom had even heard the noise. She had saved this man, just like she had saved him. It dawned on Tom that this wasn't just any dog. She wasn't here by accident. She was meant to find him, to bring him back from the edge of despair. She had been his savior in a way he could never have imagined. And in that moment, he realized that sometimes you're not the one doing the saving. Sometimes, the one you think you're helping is the one who saves you. The days passed slowly after that night, but Tom could feel something shift inside him. Max, the German shepherd, was no longer just a dog. She had become a silent partner, a constant presence that filled the empty spaces of his life. Each morning, as Tom made his coffee and sat by the window, Max would sit beside him, her gaze fixed on him as if understanding every thought that crossed his mind. It was an unspoken bond, a quiet understanding that no words could explain. But there was more to her than he had realized. Max had a way of knowing things. In the middle of the night, she would suddenly jump up and pace by the door, her ears perked, her body tense. At first, Tom thought it was just a strange habit, but then he began to notice patterns. She would react before anything happened. It was like she could sense things that were invisible to him. One evening, as they were walking through the neighborhood, Tom noticed Max pulling ahead, her body low to the ground. She moved with a purpose, as if following an invisible trail. Tom followed, confused, until they reached the edge of a nearby park. Max stopped, her eyes scanning the darkness. Then, she turned and nudged him gently with her nose. Tom frowned, unsure of what was happening. But then, through the trees, he saw a figure stumbling toward them. A young man, his clothes torn, his face pale, looking lost. Max trotted forward, her tail wagging gently, and the man stopped in his tracks. "Are you lost?" Tom asked, his voice steady. The man nodded, barely able to speak. "I don't know where I am. I can't find my way home." Tom could see the fear in his eyes, the confusion. Max stayed close to the man, her head tilted as if trying to comfort him. Tom glanced at her, realizing she had led him here. He didn't know how, but somehow, she had known that this man needed help. Without thinking, Tom guided the stranger back to his house, Max staying close, her steady presence reassuring them both. As they arrived at the door, the man turned to Tom, his eyes wide with gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice cracking. I don't know what I would have done without her." Tom looked down at Max, who was now sitting at his feet, her amber eyes soft, almost knowing. He smiled, feeling a warmth he hadn't experienced in a long time. He didn't have all the answers, but in that moment, he knew one thing for sure. Max wasn't just a dog. She was his guide, his protector, and in some strange, miraculous way, she was saving him too. As he watched the man disappear into the safety of his home, Tom's heart swelled. For the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't alone. Max had shown him something he had forgotten, that sometimes, the smallest gestures, the quietest moments, could mean everything. And with her by his side, he knew he had found a second chance, not just for her, but for himself. As the weeks passed, Tom found himself changing. He wasn't sure when it happened, but it felt like Max had slowly started to heal not just his heart, but his life. The empty house that once echoed with the sound of silence now carried a steady rhythm. Max would wake him up in the morning with a gentle nudge, always ready for the day ahead. They would walk together, side by side, through the neighborhood, the sound of their footsteps the only noise in the quiet mornings. The neighbors began to notice. At first, they were curious, then impressed by how well Tom and Max seemed to fit together. Max wasn't just a companion. She had become a part of the community, just as much as Tom had. One Saturday, Tom decided to take Max to the park. He hadn't been in months. The idea of sitting on the bench, watching the world go by, seemed peaceful. When they arrived, Max immediately took to the open space, running joyfully across the grass. Tom sat down, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. But as he watched Max, something else happened. A man approached him slowly, a hesitant smile on his face. "Is that your dog?" he asked. Tom looked up, surprised. The man had a gentle face, but there was a quiet sadness in his eyes. "Yeah," Tom replied, his voice calm. "This is Max." The man knelt down, his hand outstretched to Max. The dog, who had been running just moments before, stopped in her tracks, her ears perking up. She sniffed the air, then walked slowly toward the man. Tom watched, unsure of what was happening. Max had always been protective, but she seemed to trust this man, as if she recognized something in him. The man looked up at Tom, his eyes full of gratitude. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I just wanted to say thank you." Tom blinked, confused. "For what?" "For saving her," the man said quietly, his voice almost breaking. "I knew her before. I couldn't save her, but you did." Tom's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" The man hesitated, then spoke again. "I used to work at the shelter where she was before. I failed her. She was there for months, ignored, broken. I thought I'd never see her again." Tom looked down at Max, who was sitting beside him, her eyes soft and alert. She seemed to understand, her gaze shifting back and forth between the man and Tom. "She saved me," Tom finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "I never thought I needed saving, but she found me. She changed everything." The man nodded slowly, his lips trembling. "She's a fighter, that one." The two of them sat in silence for a moment, the world moving around them. It was as if time had stopped, allowing them to share that moment of understanding. Tom realized that Max wasn't just saving him from loneliness or despair. She was teaching him what it meant to truly live again. And in the quiet of that park, with the sound of the breeze rustling through the trees, Tom understood that sometimes, the bond between a person and a dog isn't just about companionship. It's about finding redemption, hope, and love in the most unexpected places. The days began to blend together, each one seeming to pass just a little faster than the last. Tom and Max had settled into a quiet routine, a sense of peace that Tom hadn't known in years. The house was no longer a place of emptiness and silence. It was a home. Max had become a part of his life in ways he never thought possible. Every day, they walked together, not just through the neighborhood, but through life. It was during one of these walks, Just as the sun was starting to dip below the horizon, that Tom realized something important. The world had started to feel a little brighter. Max had taught him how to embrace the present again. As the weeks turned into months, Tom's life began to change in ways he had not expected. He started to open up more, speak to people, reconnect with old friends. It was like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. But as Tom began to heal, something else was happening. Max, the dog who had once been lost and broken, had also found her way. She wasn't just his companion. She was his reflection, his mirror. In many ways, Max had saved Tom from himself, but now, she needed something in return. One rainy afternoon, Tom found himself sitting on the porch, watching the rain fall steadily outside. Max, as usual, was sitting by his side, her head resting on his lap. Tom absent-mindedly stroked her fur, thinking about everything that had happened. He realized that he hadn't seen the shelter worker in a while. He hadn't thought much about it, but the question was there now. Where had she gone? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft sound, a whimper from Max. She lifted her head, her eyes wide and alert. Tom looked down at her, confused. "What is it, girl?" he asked softly. Max stood up suddenly, walking to the edge of the porch and looking out into the rain. She let out another whimper, this time more insistent. Tom stood up, his heart starting to race. Something wasn't right. He followed Max as she trotted toward the driveway, stopping just short of the street. There, lying on the ground, was something or someone. Tom's heart skipped a beat. It was a man, barely conscious, drenched in the rain. His clothes were torn, and his skin was pale. Tom's military instincts kicked in immediately. He knelt beside the man, checking for signs of life. He was still breathing, though weakly. Max stood by, her ears flattened against her head, as if sensing Tom's worry. "Stay with him," Tom whispered, his voice steady despite the growing anxiety in his chest. He quickly ran back into the house to grab a blanket, wrapping it around the man to keep him warm. As he did, Max stayed close, never leaving the man's side. Tom's mind raced as he tried to remember the steps to take in a situation like this. He didn't have his medical kit with him, but he had his training. The man wasn't far from death, but he wasn't far from it either. Tom knew he needed to get him help, and fast. He lifted the man gently, carrying him back to the house and settling him on the couch. Max jumped up beside him, her body warm and comforting against the man's side. Tom called for help, his fingers trembling as he dialed the emergency number. But even as he waited for the paramedics to arrive, he felt something inside him shift. This man, this stranger, had found his way to Tom's door, just as Max had all those months ago. And just as Max had saved him, now it was his turn to save someone else. As the paramedics arrived and took over, Tom stood back, watching Max, who never left the man's side, her eyes full of unwavering loyalty. Tom smiled softly to himself. He had never expected to be in this position. But as he watched Max's calm presence, he realized that sometimes the greatest gift you can give is the gift of care. Just as he had once found Max, he had found his own purpose again. He wasn't alone anymore, and neither was the man on his couch. Max had shown him the way, and now he could do the same. Weeks passed, and Tom felt a new rhythm to his life. Max had truly become part of his world, a constant presence that grounded him. The man who had arrived on his doorstep, barely clinging to life, had recovered slowly with the help of the paramedics. He was still fragile, but Tom was certain he would make it. The strange thing was, he hadn't asked for any explanation. His name was David, and he had wandered into Tom's life like a lost soul looking for a place to call home, just as Tom had once been. David had no memory of how he ended up on Tom's porch. He had been too disoriented, too sick to remember much. But Max had found him, just as she had once found Tom. Max had a way of showing up when she was needed most. That was her gift. But Tom was starting to realize that maybe he had a gift too. The weeks that followed David's recovery were filled with simple moments of connection. They spent time together, talking about their pasts, their regrets, and their hopes for the future. Max was always nearby, her presence soothing in ways that words could never explain. One afternoon, as Tom and David were sitting on the porch, Tom noticed something new. Max was no longer the timid, sick dog she had once been. She had become vibrant, full of life and energy. But there was more to it than that. Max was always watching, always alert, as if she knew something Tom didn't. "She's special," David said one day, as he scratched Max behind her ears. You both are. You know that, right? Tom looked at Max, her amber eyes staring back at him, full of quiet wisdom. I think she saved me, he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. I was lost when I brought her home. But now I feel like I'm finding my way again. David nodded, understanding more than Tom realized. You know, I think she saved both of us. You just had to find her. Tom's eyes shifted to Max, who was lying beside him, her tail thumping the ground gently. She let out a soft sigh, as if in agreement. Tom smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. He knew that he couldn't have done this on his own. He needed Max, and he needed the unexpected friendship that had blossomed with David. It was strange how life worked. How, at times, the things you least expect are the ones that end up changing you the most. And as the days went by, Tom realized that Max had done more than just save his life. She had given him a purpose, a reason to believe in something again. It was a quiet miracle, something so small yet so profound. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living. And for the first time in years, Tom felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. With Max by his side and David as a friend, he knew that no matter what happened, he would never be alone again. As the months passed, Tom continued to feel a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. Max had not only helped him heal, but she had also helped David recover in ways that neither of them could have predicted. David, once lost and broken, had become a part of Tom's world, a steady friend who understood the quiet moments of healing. Their days were simple, filled with walks, conversations, and shared silence. Max was always there, a reminder of the miracle they had both witnessed. It was a late afternoon when things took an unexpected turn. Tom was sitting on the porch, the sun beginning to dip beneath the horizon, casting a golden glow over everything. Max was lying beside him, her head resting on his feet as always. David was inside, rummaging through the kitchen, but Tom could hear him humming softly, content. The world seemed to slow down, and for a moment, Tom felt as if everything was right. But then, without warning, Max's body tensed. She stood up quickly, her ears pointed forward, her nose twitching. Tom immediately noticed the shift in her energy. She wasn't just alert, she was focused, intense. Max, Tom called, confused by her sudden change in behavior. She didn't respond. Instead, she trotted to the edge of the porch, her tail stiff, eyes scanning the street. Tom followed her, his heart starting to race. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Max, what is it? He asked again, his voice more urgent. She didn't answer, but her body language said everything. She was waiting. For what? Tom wasn't sure, but he knew it was important. As he reached her side, he heard it, a soft sound in the distance, barely audible over the rustling of the wind. It was a cry, a faint whimpering sound. Tom's heart skipped a beat. He didn't recognize it, but Max did. Her body was taut, her eyes locked onto the source of the sound. Max, stay, Tom said, trying to calm her, but she was already moving, trotting quickly toward the noise. Tom followed her, his mind racing with worry. The sound grew louder as they approached the edge of the woods near the house. Max was now running ahead, her body low to the ground, focused entirely on whatever was out there. As they reached the trees, the cry grew clearer, now unmistakable. It was a puppy, lost and scared. Tom's heart sank. He had no idea how it had gotten there, but it needed help. Max stopped just short of the small bundle of fur, her eyes softening as she crouched down beside it. Tom knelt next to her, his heart full of compassion. The puppy was trembling, its eyes wide with fear. It couldn't have been more than a few weeks old, alone in the cold. It's okay, Tom whispered as he reached out to the puppy. You're safe now. As he picked up the tiny creature, he noticed Max's watchful gaze, her eyes never leaving them. She had found this puppy, just as she had found him. It was clear that Max knew something he didn't, that this little one needed a second chance, just like he had. As Tom carried the puppy back to the house, Max walked beside him, her steps steady, calm, as if proud of what she had done. Inside, David greeted them with a smile, unaware of what had just happened. What's that? He asked, his voice full of curiosity. Tom looked down at the puppy in his arms, then at Max, who was now resting by the door. She found him, Tom said softly. David nodded, understanding. Looks like she's still doing the saving around here. Tom smiled, his heart full of gratitude. Max had once again brought light into his life, and now, she had brought another soul into their home. It was a reminder that sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness could change everything. As he settled the puppy into a warm bed by the fireplace, Tom realized that Max was more than just a dog. She was a guardian, a healer, and, most of all, a reminder that the most unexpected miracles could happen when you least expected them. Max had saved him, and now, she was saving another life. And Tom knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning of the journey. As the days grew warmer, Tom watched as the puppy, whom they named Charlie, began to thrive. It was amazing to see how quickly he adapted to his new home, his tiny body filling out with each passing day. Max, ever the protector, was always nearby, keeping a watchful eye on him. It was clear that Max had taken on the role of a mother, guiding Charlie with a gentle but firm paw. Tom could see the bond between them grow stronger, and it made him smile to see how far Max had come since the day she had arrived at his door. Tom's life had shifted dramatically over the past few months. He was no longer the man who felt lost in a world he no longer understood. The quiet moments he had shared with Max had opened his eyes to what truly mattered. It wasn't about the past or the battles he had fought, but about the present, the small moments of peace that he had once overlooked. But just as he felt himself settling into this new rhythm, life had a way of throwing another curveball his way. One evening, as he sat on the porch with Max and Charlie, Tom noticed something strange. Max had been pacing back and forth, her ears perked and her body tense. It wasn't like her to be so restless. Tom stood up, his instincts kicking in, and walked over to her. "What is it, girl?" he asked softly. Max turned her head, her eyes locked onto the path that led into the woods behind the house. Tom frowned, unsure of what she was sensing, but the urgency in her movements told him this was something important. Without thinking, he grabbed his jacket and followed her. The cool night air hit his face as they made their way through the trees, the silence broken only by the rustling of leaves underfoot. Max led the way, her body low to the ground, her senses sharp. Tom's heart raced, but he trusted Max completely. She had guided him through much worse before. After a few minutes, they reached a small clearing. Tom stopped, his breath catching in his throat. There, lying motionless on the ground, was a man. His clothes were torn, and he was barely breathing, but there was no mistaking the look of desperation in his eyes. Max stopped at his side, nudging the man with her nose, urging Tom to help. Tom quickly knelt beside the man, his training kicking in. He checked for a pulse and found it faint but steady. "Hang in there," Tom muttered, his voice low. He knew the man wasn't out of danger yet, but he wasn't beyond help either. Max stayed close, her body pressed against the man's side, as if offering her own warmth and strength. Tom looked down at Max, his heart swelling with gratitude. She had led him here, just as she had done so many times before. Once again, Max had saved someone in need. The man's eyes fluttered open, and he looked up at Tom, confusion and gratitude mixing in his gaze. "Thank you," the man whispered, his voice weak. "I don't know how I got here." Tom smiled softly, helping the man sit up. "It's okay. You're safe now." Max wagged her tail, her eyes shining with a quiet sense of pride. Tom knew that this was more than just a rescue. It was a reminder that sometimes, the greatest gift you can give is the chance to start over. As they walked back to the house, the man leaning on Tom for support, Max trotted alongside them, her steps steady and sure. Tom realized that this was the life he had been waiting for, a life filled with purpose, connection, and the unconditional love of a dog who had changed everything. As he stepped inside, the warmth of the home surrounding him, Tom knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would never be alone. Max and Charlie had made sure of that. As the days turned into weeks, Tom found that his life had shifted in ways he never thought possible. The house was no longer a quiet, empty place where he spent his days in isolation. It had become a home, a sanctuary of sorts, filled with the sounds of laughter, companionship, and the comforting presence of Max and Charlie. Even David, who had once been a stranger, had found a place in Tom's world. The bond between the three of them had become undeniable. Max had brought them together in ways they couldn't have imagined. She had a way of weaving herself into their lives, like a quiet thread that bound them all. But despite the warmth that now filled the house, Tom couldn't help but feel a slight sense of unease. The world outside had continued to move on, and he found himself questioning whether he was truly ready to face it again. He had been hiding away for so long, avoiding the chaos and noise of the world. But now, as the seasons changed and the first signs of spring appeared, Tom felt the pull to re-engage with life, to step out from the shadows he had been living in for so long. One afternoon, as he sat on the porch with Max and Charlie, he realized that he couldn't stay in the safety of his home forever. He needed to find a way to move forward, to take the lessons Max had taught him and apply them to the world outside. "You ready for this, girl?" Tom asked, looking down at Max, who sat beside him, her eyes watching him intently. Max tilted her head, as if she understood exactly what he meant. She gave a soft woof and stood up, her tail wagging. Tom smiled and stood up as well. It was time. He had always thought that his life would be defined by the battles he fought in the past, by the scars that he carried. But Max had shown him that life wasn't just about surviving. It was about living, truly living, and finding the courage to move forward. With Max and Charlie by his side, Tom walked into town for the first time in months. The streets felt different now, less overwhelming. The faces he saw no longer seemed so unfamiliar. As he walked, he noticed small changes. People greeted him with warm smiles, and he found himself returning them. He even stopped by a local cafe, a place he used to visit regularly before everything changed. The barista, a young woman named Lily, recognized him immediately. "Tom, it's been a while," she said with a friendly smile. "How have you been?" Tom hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to answer. But then, as if guided by something deep within him, he spoke from his heart. "Better," he said simply. "I've been better." Max, who had been walking beside him, gave a small bark, as if agreeing. Charlie, too, seemed to feel the change. He trotted happily around Tom's feet, his little tail wagging as he took in the new sights and sounds. For the first time in a long time, Tom felt the weight of his past lift just a little bit. He was no longer defined by the things that had happened to him. He was starting to define himself. Max had given him that gift, the gift of starting over, of finding hope when it seemed like it was lost. Tom finished his coffee and stood up, ready to take the next step. He was still uncertain about what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't alone anymore. And that made all the difference. Max had saved him. And now, it was time for him to live the life she had helped him find. As weeks passed, Tom found himself feeling more and more comfortable in his own skin. He was no longer a man burdened by the past, haunted by the shadows of his former life. Every day felt like a small victory, a testament to the bond he had forged with Max, Charlie, and the world around him. Tom's routine had evolved into something that brought him peace. In the mornings, he would wake up early, Max always by his side, her head resting gently on his feet. They would go for a walk, the cool morning air filling their lungs as they made their way through the neighborhood. Charlie, still small but full of energy, would run circles around them, his little tail wagging wildly. It was during these walks that Tom had his quiet moments of reflection. He would watch Max and Charlie interact, their bond growing stronger each day, and it reminded him of how much he had changed. He wasn't the same man who had stumbled into the shelter looking for a dog. He was someone new, someone who had learned to live again. But despite the peace that filled his life, there was still one thing Tom hadn't fully addressed, the feelings that lingered in the background, the fear that had been his constant companion for so long. The fear of facing the world again, of stepping outside the safety of his home. One day, as they walked down a familiar path, Max suddenly stopped, her ears perked and her body tense. Tom looked down at her, sensing that something was different. She was staring intently ahead, her gaze unwavering. "What is it, girl?" Tom whispered, his voice soft. Max didn't respond, but her posture said it all. She was alert, focused. Tom followed her gaze and saw nothing but the empty street ahead. But something told him that she wasn't just sensing an ordinary presence. She was watching out for something or someone. The air felt heavy with anticipation. Tom took a deep breath, his heart racing slightly. He knew that Max had saved him before, but today he had to trust her again. They continued walking, Max leading the way, her steps purposeful. Tom followed her, not knowing what to expect, but trusting her instincts completely. As they rounded the corner, they came upon a scene that stopped Tom in his tracks. A young woman was sitting on the curb, her head buried in her hands. She was crying, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Tom's heart went out to her. Without thinking, he walked toward her, Max right beside him. The woman looked up as they approached, her tear-streaked face a picture of vulnerability. She saw Max and smiled weakly, her eyes filled with sadness. "She's beautiful," the woman said softly. Tom nodded, his voice gentle. "She's a good dog. She knows when someone needs help." The woman's lips trembled as she wiped away her tears. "I didn't know who to turn to," she whispered. "Everything's falling apart, and I just don't know what to do anymore." Tom knelt beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. He could feel the weight of her pain, the same kind of pain he had felt not too long ago. "It's okay," he said quietly. "You're not alone." Max sat beside the woman, her body warm and reassuring. The woman reached out to her, and Max leaned into her touch, offering comfort. It was in that moment that Tom realized how far he had come. Max had once been his saving grace, and now she was the one offering it to someone else. Tom looked at the woman and smiled softly. "Things may seem tough right now, but they'll get better. One step at a time." The woman nodded, the tears still there, but not as heavy. For the first time in a long time, she seemed to find a bit of peace. Tom stood up and looked down at Max, who met his gaze with those wise, amber eyes. They had both come full circle. Tom didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing. Life was about the people and the moments that came when you least expected them. Max had shown him that. And now, Max was showing it to someone else. Tom's days had become a delicate balance between work, home life, and his newfound connection with the world. With Max and Charlie by his side, he had found peace, but now, he was starting to realize something more. It wasn't just about living day to day anymore. It was about giving back. The woman he had helped a few days ago, the one who had been sitting on the curb in tears, had reached out to him once more. She had invited him to dinner, to thank him for the kindness he had shown her. At first, Tom hesitated. He wasn't used to people reaching out to him like that. He had always been the one who kept his distance, who built walls around himself. But something had changed. The invitation wasn't just about thanking him. It was an invitation to connect, to share a moment, to be part of something bigger. Tom knew that if he turned away, it would be like shutting a door that had been slowly opening. So he decided to go. That evening, he arrived at her house, a small, cozy place with a modest front yard. The light inside was warm, and the smell of something delicious filled the air. Max, as always, was by his side, her tail wagging in anticipation. The woman greeted him at the door, her smile wide and genuine. "I'm so glad you came," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "Please, come in. Max is welcome too." Tom smiled, feeling a strange sense of relief. "Thanks for inviting me." Inside, the house felt like a sanctuary. Soft music played in the background, and the room was filled with the scent of homemade food. The woman, whose name was Rachel, had set the table with care, and Tom could see that this wasn't just a simple meal. It was a gesture of gratitude. As they sat down to eat, Rachel shared more about her life. She spoke of the struggles she had been facing, the loss of a job, and the feeling of being stuck. She had been struggling to find her way, and it was in that moment of vulnerability that Tom realized something important. He wasn't the only one who needed saving. "It's been hard," Rachel admitted, her voice soft. "But seeing Max, seeing how she's helped you, made me realize something. Maybe I'm not as alone as I think." Tom nodded, feeling a sense of understanding. "You're not alone," he said. "We're all just trying to find our way, one step at a time." Max, who had been lying at his feet, raised her head, as if she understood the conversation. Rachel smiled at the dog. "She's something special, isn't she?" "She's more than special," Tom replied. "She's been my guide. In so many ways, she's saved me." The conversation drifted, and for the first time in a long time, Tom felt a deep sense of connection. It wasn't about the past or the future, it was about the here and now. It was about the people who crossed your path when you least expected it, and the small moments of kindness that made everything else seem possible. As the evening drew to a close, Rachel thanked Tom again for coming. "I really appreciate you being here," she said, her voice sincere. "I didn't know how much I needed this until now." Tom smiled and stood up, ready to leave. "Anytime," he said. "You're not alone." As he walked back to his truck, Max trotting beside him, Tom realized that in helping Rachel, he had helped himself. The fear of opening up, of connecting with others, had always been there, lurking in the background. But with Max by his side, he had learned to trust again. He had learned that the world wasn't as scary as he thought. And sometimes, the greatest gift you can give is simply being there for someone when they need it most. As spring settled in, Tom found himself embracing the changes in his life more than ever. The weather was warmer, and the days seemed to stretch on longer, filled with new possibilities. It was a time for growth, both for him and for the little family he had formed with Max and Charlie. Rachel, who had become a good friend, had made remarkable progress. She had started a new job, one she was passionate about, and though there were still challenges, she no longer felt trapped in the weight of her circumstances. Tom couldn't help but feel proud of how far they had both come. One afternoon, Tom was out in the backyard, working on a small garden he had started to help occupy his time. Max was lounging nearby, basking in the warmth of the sun, while Charlie played around him, chasing after sticks and leaves. Tom had always found peace in simple things, and the garden had become a place of quiet reflection. As he worked, he thought back to the day he had first found Max. He remembered the way she had looked at him, the trust in her eyes that had been the beginning of his transformation. It felt like a lifetime ago. The man he was then seemed so distant from the person he had become. There had been so much pain, so much uncertainty, but Max had been the steady force that had pulled him back from the edge. She had been his guide, his companion, and in many ways, his savior. He glanced over at Max, who was now watching him with her usual attentive gaze, as if sensing his thoughts. Her presence was always a quiet comfort, like an anchor in a storm. Charlie, on the other hand, was full of energy, constantly moving, always curious, always eager to explore the world. It was clear that both dogs had brought something unique into his life. Max had brought healing, while Charlie had brought joy, and together, they had filled the space that had once felt empty. As the days passed, Tom continued to face the world with more confidence. He began to reconnect with old friends, even volunteering at a local shelter on weekends, giving back to the community that had once given him so much. It was there, one Saturday afternoon, that he ran into an old colleague from his military days. "Tom, is that you?" the voice called out. Tom turned to see a familiar face, one he hadn't seen in years. It was Dan, a fellow Marine who had been stationed with him in the past. They exchanged greetings, and Tom could tell that Dan was surprised by how much he had changed. "You look different," Dan said, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "For the better, though." Tom chuckled, feeling a little awkward. "Yeah, I guess I have changed." The two of them spent the afternoon catching up, and for the first time in a long time, Tom felt a sense of connection to his past. It was as if the pieces of his life were finally coming together. As they said their goodbyes and Tom walked back to his truck, he realized something important. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living, fully and completely. The past no longer had a hold on him, and the future seemed full of possibilities. Max, sitting in the passenger seat, looked up at him, her eyes filled with quiet wisdom. Tom smiled at her, reaching out to give her a gentle scratch behind the ears. "You've changed my life, girl," he whispered. She wagged her tail, as if in agreement, and Tom knew that no matter what came next, he wouldn't face it alone. With Max and Charlie by his side, he had everything he needed. The road ahead was uncertain, but he was ready to walk it with them, one step at a time. As the months passed, Tom settled into a new rhythm of life, one that was rich with purpose and warmth. The small, quiet moments that once felt distant and unimportant now seemed to carry weight. He'd found a sense of peace he hadn't known in years, and it was a peace he owed to Max and Charlie. They were his family now, and together they were creating a new life, one built on connection and understanding. Tom's relationship with Rachel had deepened as well. She had become a close friend, and their shared experiences had allowed them to lean on each other for support. They spent more time together, talking about everything and nothing, finding comfort in each other's company. One afternoon, Rachel invited Tom to join her for a walk through the park, and he gladly agreed. It had been a while since he had done something as simple as walk through the park without a particular purpose. It was exactly the kind of day Tom needed. The air was crisp, the trees were just starting to change colors, and Max and Charlie were beside them, happy to be outdoors. As they walked, Tom felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He had never imagined that his life would turn out like this. A year ago, he had been consumed by darkness, isolated and lost. But now, with Max and Charlie by his side, he felt lighter. He could feel the weight of his past slowly lifting, replaced by a sense of hope and possibility. "You know, I never would have guessed that a dog could change my life so completely," Tom said, glancing at Rachel, who was walking beside him. "I always thought I was the one who needed to do the saving. But Max, she's the one who saved me." Rachel smiled softly, glancing down at Max, who was happily trotting ahead, her ears perked up in alertness. "I think you saved each other," she said gently. Tom thought about her words as they continued walking. He didn't know if he had truly saved Max, but he knew she had given him something priceless. She had given him a reason to live again. And in that, he had found something even more important, the ability to give back. As they reached the park bench, they stopped to rest. Tom sat down and watched as Max and Charlie ran off to play. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the need to rush or escape. He was exactly where he needed to be. After a few moments of quiet, Rachel spoke again. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice thoughtful. "You've made so much progress, Tom. You've come so far, and I think you're ready for something more." Tom looked at her, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Rachel hesitated before continuing. "I know it's a big step, but I think you're ready to help others. You've been through so much, and you understand pain and healing in a way that others don't. I can see how much Max has helped you, and I think you have the ability to give that same kind of hope to someone else." Tom felt a lump form in his throat as Rachel's words sank in. He hadn't thought about helping others in a long time. He had been so focused on his own healing that he had never considered the possibility of being a guide for someone else. But as he looked at Max, who was now lying beside Charlie, her eyes soft and full of trust, Tom felt a stirring inside him. Maybe Rachel was right. Maybe it was time for him to take the next step, to share what he had learned with others. He took a deep breath, looking out at the park, the world bustling around him. "I think you're right," he said quietly, his voice filled with conviction. "I think I'm ready." Max lifted her head at the sound of his voice, her amber eyes meeting his, as if she knew exactly what he was thinking. Tom smiled and reached down to pet her. For the first time in a long time, he felt truly ready to face whatever came next. He had Max and Charlie by his side, and that was all he needed. The future was still uncertain, but with them, he knew he was never alone. And that, he realized, was enough. It had been several months since that day in the park, and Tom had found himself stepping into a new chapter of his life. With Max and Charlie by his side, he had slowly begun to rebuild the parts of himself that had been broken for so long. The quiet mornings, the walks through the neighborhood, and the simple joy of being with the dogs had all become part of his healing process. He had started to volunteer at the shelter on weekends, something he had never considered before. It wasn't about rescuing dogs anymore. It was about giving back. He'd met so many people at the shelter, each with their own stories, their own struggles. Some of them were like him, lost and broken, while others just needed a little extra love and care. But as Tom worked there, helping to care for the animals and meeting the people who came to adopt them, he realized something important. It wasn't just the dogs who needed rescuing. People did, too. One afternoon, while he was at the shelter, a young woman came in, looking weary and defeated. Tom noticed her immediately. She had the look of someone who had been through a lot, someone who had lost hope. She wasn't there to adopt a dog, but to volunteer, just like him. She introduced herself as Sarah, and Tom could tell she was hesitant, unsure of how to begin. "It's not easy, is it?" Tom asked, his voice soft but full of understanding. Sarah looked up at him, her eyes filled with sadness. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I thought volunteering here would help me feel better, but I just feel more lost." Tom nodded, knowing exactly how she felt. "I know it's hard," he said, "but sometimes, helping others helps us find our way again. Just take it one step at a time." They spent the afternoon together, cleaning kennels, walking dogs, and sharing small conversations. Tom could see Sarah beginning to open up, slowly but surely. By the end of the day, she had found a sense of purpose, a spark of hope that had been missing before. "Thank you," she said, looking at Tom with a faint smile. "I didn't expect to feel better, but I do. Maybe this is what I needed." Tom smiled back, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. "I think it's exactly what you needed." As he walked home that evening with Max and Charlie, Tom couldn't help but think about how far he had come. A year ago, he had been lost, isolated, and unsure of what his future held. But now, With Max by his side and the experiences he had gained from helping others, he felt like he was finally living the life he was meant to live. There was still uncertainty, of course, and life would continue to throw its challenges his way. But Tom knew he wasn't alone anymore. He had found a purpose in helping others, in being there for those who needed it most. And with Max and Charlie by his side, he felt ready to face whatever the future held. Together, they had found a family in each other, and Tom knew that no matter what happened, they would always be there for one another. As they arrived back at the house, Tom looked down at Max, who was happily trotting beside him, her eyes full of love and trust. He gave her a gentle scratch behind the ears, and for the first time in a long time, Tom felt completely at peace. He had found his place in the world, and it was right there with the ones who mattered most.